There's a quote from the great jazz engineer Rudy Van Gelder. It goes something along the lines of this: I would never record something with 2 microphones that I could record with 1. And that's kind of my approach to things as well. It's not that I'm lazy, it's just that minimal miking is really powerful. And the most powerful thing about it is that the fewer microphones you have, the less bad phase interaction there is between microphones. And when you have a lot of bad phase interaction, your mixes tend to sound smaller, less impact, less clarity. So I'm always going for as few mics as possible as my core sound. Of course, the variation on that is I would never use 20 mics for something I could record with 15. And I will talk a little bit later about why I sometimes will use more microphones than I think I need in certain situations. But minimal miking, super, super powerful, very, very cool. But it's super easy to record an acoustic guitar with 1 microphone. It's super easy to record a guitar amp with 1 microphone. Super easy to record a violin or a cello or even a piano with 1 microphone. But what about bigger things? What about more complex things? What about something like Terry Bozzio's drum set? And if you don't know Terry Bozzio's drum set, it's one of the most, if not the most epic drum set in the world. The first time I recorded with Terry, he had 4 kick drums, 16 toms, snare drum, and 40 cymbals. And there's going to be something important about that a little bit later in the video. So yeah, pretty complex. But would a minimal miking work for something like that? So if you don't know me, my name is Ronan Chris Murphy. I am a producer and engineer, worked on hundreds of albums around the world, but I've been lucky to work with a lot of some of the greatest drummers in the world, like Terry Bozzio, like Bill Bruford, like Pat Mastelotto, like Benny Greb, Joey Boisno, Victor Bassetti, and thankfully a bunch of them have trusted me to work on their music. So how could we take a minimal approach to Terry Bozzio? Is that even feasible? I don't know. You'll tell me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you something now. I'll play you the whole thing. It's about 1 minute. And it is a recording of Terry Bozzio's The Massive Drum Set with 3 microphones. It is 2 short KSM 32s, space pair of overheads, and it is a D112 kick drum mic, all going into A Design Pacifica mic preamps and I think Apogee converters. But what you're going to hear has no processing except dynamics. I love compression. I use a lot of that. But there's no EQ, there's no reverb, there's no spatializers, any of that kind of fancy stuff. This is just 3 mics on this, one of the most epic drum sets in the world. I'm going to play it and you'll hear a little bit of my guitar at the end. This is something, project of mine that Terry Bozzio is playing on. But let's check it out and see what you think. Okay, so what did you think? If you dug it or didn't dig it, feel free to leave a comment about that down below. But again, that was 3 microphones, no processing except dynamics, no EQ, no compression, just a space pair of overheads and a kick drum mic. But I do need to throw in one sort of caveat disclaimer with this, and that is, if you saw the pictures that I showed of the drum set that was being recorded, you probably saw some other additional microphones. There were additional microphones. And also, the reason I could do this with 3 microphones is Terry Bozzio often has 3 to 4 kick drums. And in this chunk of music, he's only playing one of them. So I was able to just mute all the other mics and just push up the overheads, pan hard left and right, push up the kick drum mic that he was playing, and we got that sound. So how did we do that? Well, the super important thing is, this is really important with drums, is that great drum sounds are a collaboration with the drummer and the engineer. This is the same with guitar amps and everything else, but drums, because they can be so complex and so personal, that it's really important to understand that it's a collaboration between the engineer and the drummer. And Terry Bozzio is a great example of this. So I want to tell you, the first time I ever recorded with Terry, it was an album I was asked to record with Terry Bozzio on drums, great Tony Levin on bass, and great Steve Stevens on guitar, who a lot of people know from Steve Stevens' band, from Billy Idol's band, but he is an amazing guitar player and has a big range well beyond what you get to see beyond the great Billy Idol stuff. But anyway, I'm coming to this. I have to admit, I'm a little bit intimidated. I'm a good engineer. I had good amount of experience at this point, but this is the SS Bozzio, this gigantic thing, one of the most important drummers in the history of drum set performance, playing one of the most crazy, iconic drum sets. And so I have to go in and I got to get this right, and I am a bit nervous. But speaking of crazy, I need to throw one thing out. People say this is a crazy drum set. Some people make snide comments online about it, about why do you need all those drums? Well, Terry's not a regular kit drummer. Terry is a musician, like a pianist, like a marimba player. So everything in his kit is tuned. His toms are tuned chromatically. His cymbals are tuned chromatically. So he actually is playing sort of melodically and harmonically in the context of a band. And I have to tell you, it's pretty wild to be like jamming with a musician, playing a melodic riff, and realize the drummer is playing harmony with you on the cymbals. But nobody looks at a marimba player and says, isn't it stupid that they've got all those notes in their marimba? No, and with Terry, it's the same thing. But anyway, back to recording the SS Bozzio. So I set up, I'm like, I'm going to do this as minimally as possible. And the one thing I did different, which apparently is different from engineers before me, was the earlier engineers apparently would mic up every drum on the kit. So every tom got recorded. And by that point, I actually had a fair amount of experience recording jazz and orchestras and things like that. And I wanted to take a more orchestral approach to it. So when we record an orchestra, we don't put a microphone on every violin. We put maybe a couple mics on the first violins and a couple mics on the second violins. And we might, put accent things for soloist or maybe key bass elements. But we mic things in groups or banks. So I approached his drum set the same way. So I'd see what bank of toms or what range of toms I could record with a single mic, and then blend in as few mics as possible. I think I ended up using 13 mics on that first record for the whole drum kit. But anyway, I set up and I'm working on this, and I'm not happy. I'm not digging the sound. And this has got to be amazing, because this is Terry Bozzio and this drum set. So I'm working on it. I'm not happy. I'm not happy with the balance I'm getting, because the balance between the instruments is so key. The different parts of that instrument is so key for what Terry Bozzio does. And so I'm working away, and Terry could see that I was getting frustrated. He said, "So how's it working out for you?" I said, "I got to admit, Terry, I'm not there yet. I'm kind of frustrated, but don't worry. I will get this. I will get you taken care of." And he said, "No worries, no problem. I trust you." And then he said, "By the way, do you want, how are the cymbals working out? And I said, well, that's kind of one of the issues I'm having is, they're kind of overpowering the toms. And he said, do you want me to swap them out? Jaw hits floor. So again, this is the guy who set up his kit with 40 cymbals. And I said, you got another set? He said, yeah, I brought 2 others. So Terry went and swapped out the cymbals, and in 5 minutes we had our drum sound. What the first set was kind of thicker, darker cymbals and a little bit of sustain on them. And what they were doing is they were filling up and kind of eating up a lot of space, which took away articulation from the toms, which are so critical for what Terry does. And what he swapped out to was a thinner set of cymbals that decayed a little quicker and didn't have a lot of thick mid-range. So just by changing out those cymbals, we cleared out space for those toms to cut through. And bingo, we had it in 5 minutes. I could have spent 5 hours EQing, compressing, different mic preamps, different mics, and gotten maybe something better than where I was, but I wouldn't have gotten us something as good as Terry swapping out those. And the real key, this takeaway from this is Terry Bozzio. If ever there was an artist drummer with a big, gigantic capital A, it's Terry Bozzio, a guy who is known for his unique style, unique tone. And when we're in the studio making a record, and we've had a chance to work together on different projects, he's always like, hey, yeah, do we need to change this? How can we change up things to get a great drum sound? How can we get a sound that's going to work well for this music that we're working on? Creating great drum sounds is a collaboration between the drummer and the engineer. And like I said earlier, I've been able to work with some of the greatest drummers in the world, and almost all of them have been so cool to work with. And all of them are happy to work as collaborators, whether it's, again, drummer artists with a capital A or great session drummers. I've worked with like Gregg Bissonette a lot, who couldn't be nicer and will be happily come in and, collaborate and change anything you need to help make the record that you're trying to make. And it's usually the drummers who are very hard-headed and difficult to work with are generally the amateurs or those just starting to come up the ladder. And almost all of the greats are super cool and understand that making a record is a collaboration to get a final vision. Super, super important on that. So the big thing is, keep in mind that you have to collaborate. If you're going to do these minimal approaches to recording, you have to make sure that you get the drums or the piano or whatever you're recording sounding cool before the microphones. And when you do that work, it makes everything else a whole bunch easier. If you dig this kind of stuff, I've got a 12-hour online drum recording class, drumrecordingbootcamp.com. You can get it there. Almost everything I know about recording and mixing drums. There's even sessions for you to work with, and you can even download the 3 tracks used in this Terry Bozzio example to sort of hear how each of the elements sound on its own. One other thing too is it's very important that you don't go and do minimal miking and get yourself backed into a corner, especially for kind of heavier styles of music with drums. Somebody might have read online that it's cool to do minimal miking, so they do this Glenn Johns or something like that. And then you're trying to mix the record and you're not getting enough presence from the snare drum, for example. Very common thing that I've run into when I've mixed records for indie bands that went minimal miking on heavier music. So for certain styles of music, you do, like with heavier music, a lot of times you do need to be able to pull up that snare drum or treat it independently from the rest of the kit. Or you might just want to have that in reserve. So I will always use as few mics as possible for my core, for the core of this. But, if I've got the channels, I will put in some things to back up. Like, again, if I think, I probably won't need that ride cymbal, but it might because I've got overhead sounding great. If I've got an extra channel, an extra mic, I will throw it up and I will record that. And most likely it will stay muted for the remainder of the project. But if I'm mixing and I realize I need an important part to come up or to have that presence, I've got it there. So what I'm always trying to do is approach everything I record from a very minimalistic point of view, and then especially on more complex or heavier music, giving myself some backup options, in case we find ourselves getting into a ditch or want to move something different creatively. But that's it for now. Again, I hope this was fun and helpful, and as always, have fun and stay focused on the music.